So happy Valentines. I feel like this is like Bhante Akariko's Lonely Hearts Club. I think there's some people in a relationship here though, am I right? So maybe not so lonely. Maybe even when you're in a relationship you can feel incredibly lonely too. So that's something I often think about and smile. But isn't it interesting how much of our culture, how much of our society is set up for this idea of romantic love, and how little it seems to make us happy. And I notice especially that people who are in a long relationship seem even less happy than those people who have just gotten into one. And I think there's something interesting in that. That there's something about new love which is full of hope, full of potential, full of possibilities, full of newness, full of novelty. And then old love, as a friend of mine said, is like an old shoe. It's kind of comfortable, a bit worn around the edges, but no one really wants an old shoe. And so I'm being a bit one-sided here, I guess, because I have, believe it or not, I have loved and lost. And I understand that romantic love is actually an incredibly powerful, beautiful thing. So I guess because it's Valentine's, we should talk a little bit about romantic love. Maybe? Yeah? So I'm interested. Yes, please. My idea for this was to actually do some speed dating. Mindful dating. But no, I've moved on from that pretty quick. But what I would like to hear, I often like to go around and ask people, like to kind of broaden our understanding of a topic by doing some bit of word association. And I do try to limit it to just one word. And so when you hear this term, love, what does it mean to you? So we're going to go around the circle and we're just going to say one word. So like romantic love, you could say a feeling, you could say an image, you could say something controversial. You could say whatever comes into your mind, don't think too hard about it. Maybe that's how love will work. And if someone says your word, you have to think of another one.
Can I go first? Love. No.
Yes, you may.
Oh, that's too easy. I'll start though.
Yep. Sharing.
Caring.
Fairy tale. So caring, fairy tale. Happiness. Potential. Unconditional. Warm heart. Temporary.
I can say that I'm third wife, so
third shoe. Or not. Yeah. Support. Okay, good. Comfort. Yeah. Beauty. Overwhelming. Powerful. Yeah, so there's lots of different ideas about what love is. And I think we kind of got a mix of both, maybe that spiritual love and that kind of romantic love. And I think actually the problem for us is that we have this arbitrary distinction of romantic love as maybe not being the same kind of love as spiritual love, and spiritual love not being something that we bring into our romantic relationships. And it kind of makes sense, you know, this single word love is a little bit of a blunt instrument. It's like, you know, they say that this is probably completely wrong and false, that the Inuit people have like 1,000 words for snow or something like that, you know. And so in the same way, there's probably many different terms that we can use to talk about love. And some of the things that you just talked about, there's one word, you actually get it, yeah? Like caring. Caring is love. You know, putting your mask on is an act of love. Sharing, generosity, predicting the needs of someone else is a kind of love. Supporting someone, putting their needs above your own is a kind of love. And so there's many opportunities for us to practice love. And I think that it's a real shame that for some reason our culture doesn't really value those sorts of things as much as this very romantic fairy tale kind of version of love, which is only going to disappoint us. It's impossible. And the thing to think about is why those kind of stories have such a power over us. I mean, is it just cultural conditioning? They say that love has kind of been invented. The idea of courtly love was invented in the early Middle Ages. The idea of romantic love, as we know it, we have a very kind of Western European version of love. Remember that many cultures, and probably most human societies throughout history, had a version of love, a version of marriage that didn't rely upon love. Arranged marriages. And then there's this idea of long-term on and onness, mating for life. So pigeons, apparently the pigeons that come and frequent the monastery where I live, there's pigeons that come every day, and I read somewhere that they're monogamous. And I thought, that can't be right. I've seen them. And they're like, no boundaries. But then it was actually that they mate for life, not that they're monogamous. So they mate for life. They have a partner, but they're polyamorous. They kind of can get around. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And we know that, you know, in the animal kingdom, there's all sorts of different ways of interacting, shall we say, and the same with humans. It's like a boundless spectrum of, you know, very brief encounters and very long-term relationships. And even those brief encounters, you can show love. And you can have a fully formed relationship in a one-night stand, you know. You have the meeting, you have the frisson, you have the adventure and the excitement, and then you have the denouement, the end, the realizing that it's not going to go much further, and you move on. And so it's just like this kind of spectrum of time which is kind of compressed or drawn out. And so perhaps because of this conditioned cultural association that we have with our hearts of love, we pursue certain types of love and we value that. And I've seen things like people treating Tinder like a... Does everyone know what Tinder is? Yeah, okay. Tinder, people on Tinder treating it like a kind of like a work project. So they spend all their time kind of like trying to find the one. It must become very intoxicating. And I'm not sure if anyone here is using online dating apps. No? But there's a change that has happened where, because of this technology, people are disposable now, because you can just literally swipe, I don't know which way it is, left or right, sorry, forgive my ignorance, you can just literally swipe them away, and there's always another one. There's always another one. And so we have the kind of like these infinite possibilities. But then I've seen these graphs where people map out their Tinder use. And so it's like they had 300,000 swipes, 150,000 matches, and I still don't really know what that means, but I understand that it's kind of like a Shazam between you and another person. 150,000 matches or whatever. Out of that, you know, funnels down, 300 dates. Out of that, 300 chats, maybe like 10 dates, maybe one of those a second date. And love? None. All that work. It's crazy. And I guess people aren't going out as often as they used to. So it's harder to find someone. And I guess also, because we have all of these good rules about like workplace behaviour and things like that, there's less people kind of meeting people where they're used to. You know, you'd have these interactions that were a bit more, in the past, a bit more free, for better or for worse. And so you have these people who are very lonely because they're still looking for something that is so slippery and ephemeral. And then there's a certain percentage of us who just decide that we're giving up on that. And there's a kind of freedom that comes from that because of this time and energy that has been invested in this part of our life suddenly freed up. And when I decided to become a monk, I thought that I knew what love was, but it wasn't until I really developed the mind states of love that I started to see really the limitations of those relationships that I had been engaging in throughout my life, because I allowed those relationships to occupy this incredibly large place in my mind. You know how it is. I don't know if you've ever been in love, but you become obsessed. And they just become your world. They're all you can think about. And it's like an addiction. You're kind of like thinking about them and you're really happy to think about them till they become annoying, and then you're thinking about them because they're annoying, or you're constantly messaging each other. I hear those conversations on the train where people are forced into conversations. I imagine they're being forced into conversations where they're talking about the most mundane things. And I'm kind of like, oh, okay, this is what it means to have that kind of closeness, where you have to fill up the space somehow with something, and you talk about things that matter to you, even if it is, oh yes, the cat did that today, or what are you doing, what are you cooking for dinner, or, you know, it's kind of the minutiae of these things are so small, but they occupy a big place in your life. You spend time talking about it, thinking about it. And before I became a monk, I mean, this was my pattern too, so I'm not like super judgmental. Well, I am, I guess, but I'm not coming from a place of these relationships don't matter. They do. And when I think about the relations that I've seen that are successful, which are remarkably few, actually, and my parents are still together, I'm probably one of the few people in my generation whose parents have stayed together. But it's only through extreme stubbornness that they've managed it. And so I understand these relationships and I can see their attraction. And I do think that they are an opportunity for spiritual practice. Because when we're in a relationship, we have this sense of it being bigger than the individual. And we are pretty selfish people most of the time. So there's a very famous story from the suttas. You've probably heard it about King Pasenadi and his queen, Malika. And there's a couple of different versions of this story. The one that I like, you can find in the Chinese Agamas, I think, or maybe in the commentaries, where the king asked the queen, "Is there anyone you love more than me?" And she says, "No, I love you the most." And he says, "Well, I knew you'd say that." And she says, "Oh, there is another answer, slightly more truthful perhaps." And he's like, "What?" It's like, "Well, I think I love myself more than I love you." And he's a bit outraged, of course. And she says, "Yeah, I think I love myself the most. What about you?" "Well, I love you the most, dear." And she's like, "Okay, you love me the most. So what if I decided to get another husband? What would you do then?" And he said, "Well, I'd have to behead you," or something like that. And she's like, "Well, where's that love now?" And this is the problem with our version of love, is actually, when it comes down to it, all about ourself. We love others in relation to us. We love others because they give us something. They make us something. They make us feel something. They make us believe to be this type of person. They, I guess in a way, they kind of reinforce our sense of self. They give us an identity. They help us play out our identity. And often you see that relationships, and you've seen this in your friends, right? You've seen that sometimes these relationships can be incredibly one-sided, and that some people are more into it than the other, and some people are just there because they can't be bothered. And you see these types of relationships and these types of patterns. And now that I'm a monk, I observe, kind of like an anthropologist, kind of like seeing what's going on and thinking of it from a Buddhist point of view, and seeing those selfish motivations that are at play. And it's not just our romantic relationships, it's actually all our relationships. It's our family, it's our friends, it's our work, it's our interactions with a group like this. There's always something going on that isn't quite that kind of openness, that kind of expansiveness that we kind of talk about when we talk about love. It's a little bit of self-interest at play, right? And so that's okay. It's okay because we're all on a journey and we're all coming from different places and we're all going somewhere different. But if you're in a friendship, if you're in a family, if you're in a relationship, hopefully you've started to move on a little bit from just being a purely selfish person. So for many people, there's this progression through our life where we're born, we're at the center of our own world, and we're at the center of our family's life. We take that on board and we can be pretty selfish. I've seen children who are incredibly self-centered, and I was like that too, I imagine. And then maybe they start to learn that they're not the center of the universe, perhaps when another child is born behind them, or when they understand that they have to put their family first, perhaps. And definitely there's a progression as we move from being a child towards being an adult, where we become more aware of our place in the universe. We weren't the center of the universe after all. And when we enter a relationship, whether it's a circle of friends or a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship or whatever kind of relationship it is, we move from being I, me, mine, to a we, an us. So we move from being a purely kind of selfish, kind of, I'm just simplifying this somewhat, person to someone who cares about someone else, even though there's still this mixed intention of self-interest. We're moving from that childlike mind of concern only for our own needs to thinking about someone else's needs. And it's quite an important stage of growth for us. And some of the tensions that you find in relationships are those tension points of where we're willing to give up something of our things for someone else's stuff, where we're willing to compromise. I mean, compromise, isn't that something that other people do? And it's those points where we're not willing to let go that we cause this tension in relationships. But then, hopefully as we go along, we'll see the limitations of this kind of relationship. It's so fragile. It's so precarious. It's so dependent upon that other person. And so you're very vulnerable. It could change at any moment. The things that you used to love about them can start to drive you nuts. The way they eat with a spoon. And you just want to take that spoon. And those things that attracted you, like that kind of irresponsible, rakish charm, becomes a person who's barely functional, right? And this is what the Buddha talked about when he talked about impermanence. This is what it means. Things change. You change. Your needs change. And so it's no surprise that relationships also change. And it's no surprise that it's no surprise that when those changes happen, if it happens to us, then it's really hard, it breaks our heart. If we're the one kind of creating the change, we're kind of like these agents of change, so we can feel quite powerful and good. And but someone's going to get hurt. And my friend who's a divorce lawyer talks about just that, how powerful that shift is from people who loved each other to people who are just so cruel to each other. And it's like a complete shift. And I think we were talking about that before, that idea of that feeling of love can change to a feeling of hate so quickly. And you see people using their children as, weapons against each other and manipulating the child's mind, trying to turn them. And so you think, how did this happen? That you have this beautiful connection that turns into this horrible thing. And there's so many reasons for these things to happen, but the basic one is to just accept the truth that nothing lasts, nothing stays the same, everything is impermanent. And so this is why those kind of romantic relationships can take us so far on our spiritual path. But there's a whole other world of love that we can experience that is not limited to one person, not limited to one small group like a family group or a friendship group or a spiritual community, a chosen family. And that love is what they often call spiritual love. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing as that other kind of love, but it's missing some of the things that limit that love. So one of the things that a spiritual love doesn't have, that romantic or family or friendship love has, is that expectation of getting something back. So this is a common feature of our relationships, our friendships, our family, this kind of quid pro quo. I love you because you'll look after me too. I'll look after you if you love me, and you can change very quickly. But spiritual love, you don't have that expectation of getting something back. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's not limited by number or scope. So with our kind of regular love, like romantic love, it's limited to one or two or three or however many people are in your relationship, and it's just limited to that person, those people. Your friendship, your family, it's limited to those people. So it's limited by number. Whereas a spiritual love is not limited by number. And a spiritual love isn't limited by its scope. There's no boundaries. So it's not like I only limit to this group or this place or those people who think like me or that country or that race or whatever. It doesn't have those barriers around it. And when we think about spiritual love, when we practice in the way that we just did before with our metta, we're actively dissolving boundaries. We're breaking those boundaries down. We're increasing the number of people, of beings that we are providing our love to. And this is something quite profound, because through that process of mental development, we start to realize that actually our love is not limited, our love is not bounded, our love is infinite. that love is something that you can give to every being, to everyone. And this kind of can create some tension in the mind, because it's like having like an extra sense of perception or something, and you just it's almost like you feel like, yeah, well, that's fine in theory, but I can't do that in practice. You know, you can't just walk around loving everyone. You can't be nice to everyone. You can't care about everyone. Can you? I don't know. Today there was a woman at the train station who, as I walked past, I could see that she was crying. And she was kind of shaking and crying. She was on the phone. And the first thing that came into my head, I'm ashamed to admit, was like, not getting involved. Just like ignore and keep walking. Because that's what we have to do, right? To survive in this world. We talk about this kind of boundless love, but then in practice, we've only got so much time, we've only got so many resources, we've only got so much energy, we've only got so much that we can give. And when we aren't aware of those real and practical boundaries, when we have weak or porous boundaries, where we let people kind of in the whole time, we can very quickly become exhausted, angry, resentful, irritated, overwhelmed, and so there's part of our practice is just managing where we put those boundaries and where we open them up. So the safest place, of course, is in our practice. We can open those boundaries up in our practice. We can experience that kind of infinite mind state that is filling the world with love. And then when we take that back into the world, it still does need to show up. You can't just sit down and give love to all living beings and then walk out of here and ignore the homeless person or be mean to the bus driver. So we have to understand what's going on here. We have to see the gap between theory and practice. It's like me today, like when I saw that resistance come into my mind, I knew it was happening. Like, of course I cared about this person, but I'm in a public place, I'm about to catch a train, I can't be late. What could I do? What I could do was a mental act of love. You know, may she be happy, may she be well, you know, maybe she be free from this suffering. That's a little bit better than just this kind of wall that comes up and like, nah, not dealing with you, can't see you, don't care. You see the difference? It's so subtle. It's so subtle, but if you're aware of it, it's very powerful because you're performing this mental act and you're also dissolving that wall between you and others. You're getting rid of that resistance. You're getting rid of that ill will, that wanting to push something away from your mind. You're actually starting to see, in line with the Buddha's teaching about the noble truth of suffering and confronting it. Because when we're pushing things away like that, we're just magicking it, pretending that suffering is not there, and we're actually covering up our own suffering, the suffering that we have in the company of others' suffering, which is what marriage is for, after all. So we see someone else suffering and we want to avoid that suffering ourselves. We see that suffering it makes us suffer, and so we don't want to get involved. But when we can have this kind of mind of love, it actually is more powerful than that desire for pushing away. That mind of love that we practice can come forth more easily the more we practice. And the more we practice metta, the more we condition the mind towards a state of love, the more familiar we become with what that mind looks and feels like. Through the practice of meditation, by developing it, by making it big, by making it powerful, by immersing ourselves in it, by staying in that mind for a long time, the more that mind becomes predominant and becomes instinctual, it becomes more natural. And this is something that really surprised me when I'd done a lot of meditation practice and had been practicing a lot of metta. I would walk out into the world and I would love everyone. You've probably experienced it, yes? Yeah? Yeah, oh yeah, all the time, yes. When you do a retreat, right, the mind becomes so clear. You let go of so much hate and anger. You're keeping on inclining the mind towards these beautiful mind states. You feel happy. So when you encounter other beings, you have this huge reservoir which is so full, it's overflowing. And that kind of overflowing sense of love is what we mean about when we talk about spiritual love. It's abundant. You know, you've got a little bit of it, you can just pour it over there. You can pour it over there. It doesn't decrease. It's infinite. But you can only access that when you've developed it. It's not something that you can just wish into being. May I have a mind full of love. It's a good start, but you need to develop it. You need to get the depth and the breadth of that reservoir built. You need to increase the container which you experience love in through that practice of mental development in the mind through meditation. And then you'll see how naturally it arises when it comes into contact with another being. And even when you do something like meditate on the difficult person, you're conditioning the mind to see that person with a mind of love. And I've seen so often in my own mind, when I encounter that person who is difficult, and I've been practicing metta towards them, my mind is preconditioned, it's primed, so that when they pop up, that feeling of love pops up too. And it's like, what? You know, how did this happen? This difficult person is suddenly like a baby that I just want to care for. And so we see how, you know, powerful the mind is. How through training we can grow that mind, and how that training has an impact in our non-meditation life. For some reason, I've just been talking for a while, so I'll stop in a second, but the image that keeps on coming up into my mind is, I've just got to be very careful about how I say this, interspecies love. So I'm not talking about I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not talking about So interspecies love is my poorly phrased way of thinking about those YouTube videos that I've seen of a dog and cat who are best friends. Okay, does it make more sense now? Yeah? Okay, phew. Okay. Or, sorry, I'm blushing a little. Or I think I've seen like a goat and a bird, or a cheetah and a monkey, some that I've seen. Have you seen those kind of videos of animal friends? And it goes against everything that they should be conditioned, or instinctually they should be predator and prey, or at least wary of each other. And you think, gosh, if these animals can do it, then surely I can be nice to that person who's over there who's difficult or whatever. You know, surely I can forgive my partner, or surely I can have a bigger heart. You know, these are animals that are basically designed to hate each other and kill each other. Maybe not hate each other, but certainly they've had to overcome something, or maybe not overcome, maybe revert to a place where those things just don't matter. Those boundaries, those distinctions just don't matter. And you think, imagine my life if all those things that I've grown to enjoy hating, all those things that get me riled up, if I could just kind of like erase those things, then the possibilities for my own mind and my own life would be quite different, right? I could be friends with so many more people, but I've put them over there because they belong to a certain political party. And I've built this wall between them. And imagine a mind or a life that didn't have those distinctions. Just like those owls and the cats that I've seen that are best friends. You know, or there's a video I remember seeing of two little boys running towards each other, who was just so happy to see each other. One of them happens to be white, one of them happens to be black. And so this kind of narrative around this is like, see, like, you know, kids don't see colour. You know, in the same way those animals don't see distinctions unless they've been conditioned in a certain way. Same with us, we're conditioned in certain ways too. And we condition our mind constantly. When we think about those politicians, we're conditioning our mind. When we think about that person we don't like, we're conditioning our mind. And so this is why we have to be so careful. Even the smallest drop of hate or aversion can grow so quickly. And we're conditioning our mind in that way. And so much better then to spend our time developing that mind in meditation which actively opposes those kind of mental states. And that's why I said it's so important to recognize when those mental states are absent. Because when they're absent, then we start to see what the mind is like without those underlying tendencies of resistance, without those hindrances of ill will, without those defilements of anger and hate. When we see the mind without those, it's like those animals that are somehow unconditioned to see each other as predator and prey. And so this is that process of seeing what it actually is to have a mind, understanding the things that come into it, the processes that happen when those things arise, and understanding what it means to let go of those things, and then enjoying what is left. You know, a mind without anger and hate, we're pretty simple. A mind without anger and hate is usually a mind of love and happiness and joy. And so as we let go of those mental states and cultivate those other more positive states, then we're just left feeling happier, healthier, more balanced, more calm, more energized. We have much more to offer to ourselves we have much more to offer to our partners, to our family, to our friends, because we've got that reservoir of love that's bubbling over and full of a fuller capacity to share those good mind states with others. And so this is how we go about developing that spiritual love. And it's a truly spiritual love because we do it, we get good results for ourselves, we give good results to others, and we do it without expecting anything back. But it's that lack of expectation that is the icing on the cake, because you'll find that when you practice love in this way, you always get a good result. Something always comes back. And so on this Valentine's Day, my wish to you, my Valentine's gift, is a small talk on love, and may the cherry on your cake, your Valentine's cake, I'm kind of mixing metaphors here, may it be a small progression in your spiritual practice towards this beautiful state of love, spiritual love, and may you all be happy, may you all be well, and may you all get the love you so richly deserve.